Let's go ahead and get started. So, we are reading Fingerprints of the Gods, um, and we are into part five of the book, or we're just starting part five of the book. So, that means we're on chapter 28 of 52. So, we're a little bit past the midpoint. It's been a good, easy read so far. It's the first book I've read of Graham Hancock's, and he makes it a very easy read, and I think that's because his background is in journalism, um, and a good journalist will write so that people can actually understand it and not try to make themselves sound important by using big fancy words. Um, Not that I'm intimidated by big fancy words, but it does make for an easier read. Anyway, part five is titled "The Mysteries of the Myths." Um, the Mysteries of the Myths 2, the Processional Code, and it starts right off the bat with a picture, an illustration before we actually get into chapter 28. So I'll bring that up. There is no, it just says the celestial sphere is the whole caption. So we'll show you that. North celestial pole, south celestial pole, celestial equator, and the ecliptic. Okay, so chapter 28, The Machinery of Heaven, and it starts right off with a quote. Quote, although a modern reader does not expect a text on celestial mechanics to read like a lullaby, he insists on his capacity to understand mythical images instantly because he can respect as scientific only page-long approximation formulas and the like. He does not think of the possibility that equally relevant knowledge might once have been expressed in everyday language. He never suspects such a possibility, although the visible accomplishments of ancient cultures, to mention only the pyramids or metallurgy, should be a cogent reason for concluding that serious and intelligent men were at work behind the stage, men who were bound to have used a technical language. End quote. The quotation is from the late Giorgio de Santillana, a professor of the history of science at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. In the chapters that follow, we shall be learning about his revolutionary investigations into ancient mythology. In brief, however, his proposition is this: long ages ago, serious and intelligent people devised a system for veiling the technical terminology of an advanced astronomical science behind the everyday language of myth. Is Santillana right? And if he is right, who were these serious and intelligent people? These astronomers, these ancient scientists who worked behind the stage of prehistory. Let us start with some basics. The wild celestial dance. The Earth makes a complete circuit around its own axis once every 24 hours and has an equatorial circumference of 24,902.45 miles. It follows, therefore, that a man standing still on the equator is in fact in motion, revolving with the planet at just over 1,000 miles per hour. Viewed from outer space, looking down on the North Pole, the direction of rotation is anti-clockwise. While spinning daily on its own axis, the Earth also orbits the Sun, again in an anti-clockwise direction, on a path which is slightly elliptical rather than completely circular. It pursues this orbit at truly breakneck speed, traveling as far along it in an hour, 66,600 miles, as the average motorist will drive in 6 years. To bring the calculations down in scale, this means that we are hurtling through space much faster than any bullet at the rate of 18.5 miles every second. In the time that it has taken you to read this paragraph, we have voyaged about 550 miles farther along Earth's path around the Sun. With a year required to complete a full circuit, the only evidence we have of the tremendous orbital race we are participating in is the slow march of the seasons, and in the operations of the seasons themselves, it is possible to see a wondrous and impartial mechanism at work, distributing spring, summer, autumn, and winter fairly around the globe, across the northern and southern hemispheres, year in and year out, with absolute regularity. The Earth's axis of rotation is tilted in relation to the plane of its orbit, at about 23.5 degrees to the vertical. This tilt, which causes the seasons, points the North Pole and the entire northern hemisphere away from the sun for 6 months a year, while the southern hemisphere enjoys its summer, and points the South Pole and the southern hemisphere away from the sun for the remaining 6 months, while the northern hemisphere enjoys its summer. The seasons result from the annual variation in the angle at which the sun's rays reach any particular point on the Earth's surface, and from the annual variation in the number of hours of sunlight received there at different times of the year. The Earth's tilt is referred to in technical language as the obliquity, and the plane of its orbit, extended outwards to form a great circle in the celestial sphere, is known as the ecliptic. Astronomers also speak of the celestial equator, which is an extension of the Earth's equator into the celestial sphere. The celestial equator is today inclined at about 23.5 degrees to the ecliptic, because the Earth's axis is inclined at 23.5 to the vertical. This angle, termed the obliquity of the ecliptic, is not fixed and immutable for all time. On the contrary, as we saw in Chapter 11, in relation to the dating of the Andean city of Tiwanaku, it is subject to constant though very slow oscillations. These occur across a range of slightly less than 3 degrees, rising closest to the vertical at 22.1 and falling farthest away at 24.5. A full cycle from 24.5 to 22.1 and back again to 24.5 degrees takes approximately 41,000 years to complete. So our fragile planet nods and spins while soaring along its orbital path. The orbit takes a year and the spin takes a day, and the nod has a cycle of 41,000 years. A wild celestial dance seems to be going on as we skip and skim and dive through eternity, and we feel the tug of contradictory urges to fall into the sun on the one hand, to make a break for the outer darkness on the other. Recondite influences. The sun's gravitational domain, in the inner circles of which the Earth is held captive, is now known to extend more than 15 trillion miles into space, almost halfway to the nearest star. Its pull upon our planet is therefore immense. Also affecting us is the gravity of the other planets with which we share the solar system. Each of these exerts an attraction which tends to draw the Earth out of its regular orbit around the Sun. The planets are of different sizes, however, and revolve around the Sun at different speeds. The combined gravitational influence they are able to exert thus changes over time in complex but predictable ways, and the orbit changes its shape constantly in response. Since the orbit is an ellipse, these changes affect its degree of elongation, known technically as its eccentricity. This varies from a low value close to zero, when the orbit approaches the form of a perfect circle, to a high value of about 6% when it is at its most elongated and elliptical. There are other forms of planetary influence too. Thus, though no explanation has yet been forthcoming, it is known that shortwave radio frequencies are disturbed when Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars line up, and in this connection, evidence is evidence also emerged of a strange and unexpected correlation between the positions of Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars in their orbits around the Sun and violent electrical disturbances in the Earth's upper atmosphere. This would seem to indicate that the planets and the Sun share in a cosmic electrical balance mechanism that extends 1 billion miles from the center of our solar system. Such an electrical balance is not accounted for in current astrophysical theories. Again, remember this is in the 1990s. I don't know if they've accounted for it, but it was 30 years ago. Okay, so then we have another illustration titled The Obliquity of the Ecliptic Varies from 22.1 degrees to 24.5 over a cycle of 41,000 years. So, let me bring that up. You can see it in illustration. So, variation in obliquity of the pole is here. This is the plane of orbit, the ecliptic, and the plane of the orbit, and this is the pole of the orbit. So, there you go. Okay. Oh, and we have another picture right after that. So, sorry about that. Did not realize that. So, it'll take us back. And this one doesn't have a... Oh, it does. Inner planets of the solar system is the caption on it. So we have the pole of the ecliptic, the pole of the Earth at 22.1 degrees to 24.5. Venus, Mercury. I thought that one of the inner... Oh, no. Okay, I was misremembering. For a second there, I was thinking that Venus moved in the opposite direction. It doesn't. It orbits in the same direction, but it rotates in the opposite direction. So we're rotating, if you're looking down at the North Pole from space, we would be orbiting, we would be rotating counterclockwise, and we would be orbiting counterclockwise, and the moon would be orbiting us counterclockwise. And the same would go for Mercury. It would be rotating counterclockwise, orbiting counterclockwise. And Venus orbits counterclockwise, but rotates clockwise. I think I got that right. The New York Times, from which the above report is taken, does not attempt to clarify matters further. Its writers are probably unaware of just how much they sound like Berosus, the Chaldean historian, astronomer, and seer of the 3rd century BC, who made a deep study of the omens he believed would presage the final destruction of the world. He concluded, quote, I, Berosus, interpreter of Belus, affirm that all the earth inherits will be consigned to flame when the 5 planets assemble in Cancer, so arranged in one row that a straight line may pass through their spheres. End quote. A conjunction of 5 planets that can be expected to have profound gravitational effects will take place on 5 May in the year 2000, when Neptune, Uranus, Venus, Mercury, and Mars all align with Earth on the other side of the planet, setting up a sort of cosmic tug of war. Let us also note that modern astrologers who have charted the Mayan date for the end of the 5th sun calculate that there will be a most peculiar arrangement of planets at that time. Indeed, an arrangement so peculiar that, quote, it can only occur once in 45,200 years. From this extraordinary pattern, we might well expect an extraordinary effect. End quote. No one in his or her right mind which would rush to accept such a proposition. Nevertheless, it cannot be denied that multiple influences, many of which we do not fully understand, appear to be at work within our solar system. Among these influences, that of our own satellite, the moon, is particularly strong. Earthquakes, for example, occur more often when the moon is full or when the earth is between the sun and the moon. When the moon is new or between the sun and earth, when the moon crosses the meridian of the affected locality, and when the moon is closest to the earth on its orbit. Indeed, when the moon reaches this latter point, technically referred to as its perigee, its gravitational attraction increases by about 6%. This happens once every 27 and one-third days. The tidal pull that it exerts on these occasions affects not only the great movements of our oceans, but those of the reservoirs of hot magma penned within the Earth's thin crust, which has been described as resembling, quote, a paper bag filled with honey or molasses, swinging along at a rate of more than 1,000 miles an hour in equatorial rotation and more than 66,000 miles an hour in orbit, end quote. The wobble of a deformed planet. All this circular motion, of course, generates immense centrifugal forces, and these, as Sir Isaac Newton demonstrated in the 17th century, cause the Earth's paper bag, quote unquote, to bulge outwards at the equator. The corollary is a flattening at the poles. In consequence, our planet deviates slightly from the form of a perfect sphere and is more accurately described as an oblate spheroid. Its radius at the equator, 3,963.374 miles, is about 14 miles longer than its polar radius, 3,949.921 miles. For billions of years, the flattened poles and the bulging equator have been engaged in a covert mathematical interaction with the recondite influence of gravity. Quote, because the Earth is flattened, explains one authority, the moon's gravity tends to tilt the Earth's axis so that it becomes perpendicular to the moon's orbit, and to a lesser extent the same is true for the sun. End quote. At the same time, the equatorial bulge, the extra mass distributed around the equator, acts like the rim of a gyroscope to keep the Earth steady on its axis. Year in, year out, on a planetary scale, it is this gyroscopic effect that prevents the tug of the sun and the moon from radically altering the Earth's axis of rotation. The pull these two bodies jointly exert is, however, sufficiently strong to force the axis to precess, which means that it wobbles slowly in a clockwise direction opposite to that of the Earth's spin. This important motion is this important motion is our planet's characteristic signature within the solar system. Anyone who has ever set a top spinning should be able to understand it without much difficulty. A top, after all, is simply another type of gyroscope. In full uninterrupted spin, it stands upright, but the moment its axis is deflected from the vertical, it begins to exhibit a secondary behavior, a slow and obstinate reverse wobble around a great circle. This wobble, which is precession, changes the direction in which the axis points while keeping constant its newly tilted angle. A second analogy, somewhat different in approach, can help to clarify matters a little further. And we have a numbered list here with a picture in the middle of it. 1. Envisage the Earth floating in space inclined at approximately 23.5 degrees to the vertical and spinning around on its axis once every 24 hours. 2. Envisage this axis as a massively strong pivot or axle passing through the center of the Earth, exiting via the north and south poles and extending outwards from there in both directions. 3. Imagine that you are a giant striding through the solar system with orders to carry out a specific task. 4. Imagine approaching the tilted Earth, which, because of your great size, now looks no bigger to you than a mill wheel. 5. Imagine reaching out and grasping the two ends of the extended axis. 6. And imagine yourself slowly beginning to interrotate them, pushing one end, pulling the other. 7. The Earth was already spinning when you arrived. 8. Your orders, therefore, are not to get involved in its axial rotation, but rather to impart to it its other motion, that slow clockwise wobble called precession. 9. To fulfill this commission, you will have to push the northern tip of the extended axis up and around a great circle in the northern celestial hemisphere, while at the same time pulling the southern tip around an equally large circle in the southern celestial hemisphere. This will involve a slow swiveling, pedaling motion with your hands and shoulders. And then we have the picture. I'll go ahead and show that before I finish the numbered list, which goes through 12. So this is precession, is what the caption says. So we have this background with constellations on it. 13,000 years ago, the North Pole pointed towards Vega, as it will do again in 12,500 years from now. And the North Pole today points towards Polaris. So that's why Polaris is considered the North Star. Vega will be the North Star again in another 12,500 years. It's an interesting coincidence that 12,500 years ago to 13,000 years ago is the end of the Younger Dryas, which may be the source of the flood myths. Anyway, I'm sure they have nothing to do with each other. 10. Be warned, however, the mill wheel of the Earth is heavier than it looks. So much heavier, in fact, that it's going to take you 25,776 years to turn the two tips of its axis through one full precessional cycle, at the end of which they will be aiming at the same points in the celestial sphere as when you arrived. Ooh, excuse me. As when you arrived. 11. Oh, and by the way, now that you've started the job, we may as well tell you that you're never going to be allowed to leave. As soon as one processional cycle is over, another must begin, and another, and another, and another, and so on endlessly forever and ever and ever. 12. You can think of this, if you like, as one of the basic mechanisms of the solar system, or, if you prefer, as one of the fundamental commandments of the divine will. In the process, so that's the end of the list. In the process, little by little, as you slowly sweep the extended axis around the heavens, its two tips will point to one star after another in the polar latitudes of the southern celestial hemisphere, and sometimes, of course, to empty space, and to one star after another in the polar latitudes of the northern celestial hemisphere. We are talking here about a kind of musical chairs among the circumpolar stars, and what keeps everything in motion is the Earth's axial precession. A motion driven by giant gravitational and gyroscopic forces that is regular, predictable, and relatively easy to work out with the aid of modern equipment. Thus, for example, the northern pole star is presently Alpha Ursae Minoris, which we know as Polaris, but computer calculations enable us to state that with certainty that in 3000 BC, Alpha Draconis occupied the pole position. At the time of the Greeks, the northern pole star was Beta Ursae Minoris, and in AD 14,000, it will be Vega. A great secret of the past. It will not hurt to remind ourselves of some of the fundamental data concerning the movements of the Earth and its orientation in space. Its tilt at about 23 1.5 degrees to the vertical, an angle from which it can vary by as much as 1.5 degrees on either side over periods of 41,000 years. And then we have another illustration saying equinoxes and solstices, and then there's a bulleted list below that. I'll show the illustration first. Equinoxes and solstices. Okay, so north is over here to the left of the screen. Sunrise on summer solstice, sunrise on the equinoxes, sunrise on winter solstice. Okay. And if these are what I think they are, then this center of these three lines is the equator. This would be the tropic of which is which, Cancer and Capricorn. I always forget which one's which. And then north is way off. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong on that. I could be totally wrong. Or that's the sun. I'm sorry, I was totally way off. That is the orbit of, or the movement of the sun. Okay. I think I understand that illustration. I think. It's, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'm quite grasping it, but maybe. I don't know. Anyway, let's move on. So the bulleted point says it completes a full precessional cycle once every 25,776 years. Point 2, it spins on its own axis once every 24 hours. Point 3, it orbits the sun once every 365 days, actually 365.2422 days. And point 4, the most important influence on its seasons is the angle at which the rays of the sun strike it at various points on its orbital path. So, yeah, I was way off on my initial understanding of that illustration. Anyway, whatever. Let us also note that there are 4 crucial astronomical moments in the year, marking the official beginning of each of the 4 seasons. These moments, or cardinal points, which were of immense importance to the ancients, are the winter and summer solstices and the spring and autumn equinoxes. In the northern hemisphere, the winter solstice, the shortest day, falls on 21 December, and the summer solstice, the longest day, on 21 June. In the southern hemisphere, on the other hand, everything is literally upside down. Their winter begins on 21 June and summer on 21 December. Yeah, so I don't know how I got so far off. The equinoxes, by contrast, are the 2 points in the year on which the day and night are of equal length all over the planet. Once again, however, as with the solstices, the date that marks the onset of spring in the northern hemisphere, 20 March, marks that of autumn in the southern hemisphere, and the date for the onset of autumn in the northern hemisphere, 22 September, marks the onset of spring in the southern hemisphere. Like the subtler variations of the seasons, all this is brought about by the benevolent obliquity of the planet. The northern hemisphere's summer solstice falls at that point in the orbit when the North Pole is aimed most directly towards the sun. 6 months later, the winter solstice marks that point when the North Pole is aimed most directly away from the sun. And logically enough, the reason that day and night are of exactly equal length all over the planet on the spring and autumn equinoxes is that these mark the 2 points when the Earth's axis of rotation lies broadside on to the sun. Let us now take a look at a strange and beautiful phenomenon of celestial mechanics. This phenomenon is known as the precession of the equinoxes. It has rigid and repetitive mathematical qualities that can be analyzed and predicted precisely. It is, however, extremely difficult to observe and even harder to measure accurately without sophisticated instrumentation. In this, there may lie a clue to one of the great mysteries of the past. Okay, getting on into chapter 29. Let me see. Pause here a second. There are there are 5 chapters in this part of the book. Let me see. Okay. Hmm. Okay. I'm going to only read 2 chapters tonight, and then next reading, the one on Friday, I'll read the other 3. And that will be a longer session, but not too bad. So, chapter 29, the first crack in an ancient code. The plane of the Earth's orbit projected outwards to form a great circle in the celestial sphere is known as the ecliptic. Ringing around the ecliptic in a starry belt that extends approximately 7 degrees north and south are the 12 constellations of the zodiac: Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpius, Sagittarius, Capricornus, Aquarius, and Pisces. These constellations are irregular in size, shape, and distribution. Nevertheless, and one assumes by chance, their spacing around the rim of the ecliptic is sufficiently even to bestow a sense of cosmic order upon the diurnal risings and settings of the sun. To picture what is involved here, do the following. 1. Mark a dot in the center of a blank sheet of paper. 2. Draw a circle around the dot about half an inch away from it. 3. Enclose the circle in a second larger circle. The dot represents the sun. The smaller of the 2 concentric circles represents the Earth's orbit. The larger circle represents the rim of the ecliptic. Around the perimeter of this larger circle, therefore, you should now draw 12 boxes, spacing them evenly to represent the constellations of the zodiac. Since there are 360 degrees in a circle, each constellation can be considered to occupy a space of 30 degrees along the ecliptic. The dot is the sun, the inner of the 2 concentric circles. What? Why is he repeating himself? Okay, whatever. The dot is the sun, the inner of the 2 concentric circles is Earth's orbit. We know that the Earth travels on this orbit in an anti-clockwise direction from the west towards the east, and that every 24 hours it also makes one complete rotation around its own axis, again from the west towards the east. From these 2 movements, 2 illusions result. 1. Each day as the planet turns from west to east, the sun, which is of course a fixed point, appears to move across the sky from east to west. 2. Roughly every 30 days, as the spinning Earth journeys along its orbital path around the sun itself slowly appears to pass through one after another of the 12 zodiacal constellations, which are also fixed points. And again, it appears to be moving in an east to west direction. Or I'm sorry, east west, not necessarily east to west. He just says east dash west. On any particular day of the year, in other words, corresponding on our own diagram to any point we care to choose around the inner concentric circle marking the Earth's orbit, it is obvious that the sun will lie between an observer on the Earth and one of the 12 zodiacal constellations. On that day, what the observer will see, so long as he or she is up and about well before dawn, is the sun rising in the east in the portion of the sky occupied by that particular constellation. Beneath the clear and unpolluted heavens of the ancient world, it is easy to understand how human beings might have felt reassured by regular celestial motions such as these. It is equally easy to understand why the four cardinal points of the year, the spring and autumn equinoxes, the winter and summer solstices, should everywhere have been accorded immense significance. Even greater significance was accorded to the conjunction of these cardinal points with the zodiacal constellations. But most significant of all was the constellation in which the sun was observed to rise on the morning of the spring or vernal equinox. Because of the Earth's axial precession, the ancients discovered that this constellation was not fixed or permanent for all time, but that the honor of housing or carrying the sun on the day of the vernal equinox circulated very, very slowly among all the constellations of the zodiac. In the words of Giorgio de Santillana, quote, the sun's position amongst the constellations at the vernal equinox was the pointer that indicated the hours of the precessional cycle. Very long hours indeed. The equinoctial sun occupying each zodiacal constellation for almost 2,200 years. The direction of the Earth's slow axial precession is clockwise, i.e., east to west, and thus in opposition to the direction of the planet's annual path around the sun. In relation to the constellations of the zodiac lying fixed in space, this causes the point at which the spring equinox occurs, quote, to move stubbornly along the ecliptic in the opposite direction to the yearly course of the sun. That is, against the right, quote unquote, within the quote, sequence of the zodiacal signs Taurus, Aries, Pisces, Aquarius, instead of Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, Taurus. End quote. Okay, then we have an illustration with the 12 zodiac signs. Um, I'll show you here. Is it? And there is no um, separate caption. So we have direction in which the vernal points shift as a result of precession, which would be clockwise from our perspective. Direction of the annual path of the sun through the 12 houses of the zodiac, counterclockwise. And then, of course, we have the 12 zodiac signs in their order. So, yeah, then we've got, and they're around the ecliptic circle. And then he's got marked vernal equinox at the eastern horizon. Yeah, okay. During the course of each year, the Earth's movement along its orbit causes the stellar background against which the sun is seen to rise to change from month to month. Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, etc., etc. At present, on the vernal equinox, the sun rises due east between Pisces and Aquarius. The effect of the precession is to cause the vernal point to be reached fractionally earlier in the orbit each year, with the result that it very gradually shifts through all 12 houses of the zodiac, spending 2,160 years in each sign and making a complete circuit in 25,920 years. The direction of this precessional drift, in opposition to the annual path of the sun, is Leo, Cancer, Gemini, Taurus, Aries, Pisces, Aquarius. To give one example, the quote-unquote age of Leo, i.e. the 2160 years during which the sun on the vernal equinox rose against the stellar background of the constellation of Leo, lasted from 10,970 until 8,810 BC. We live today in the astrological no man's land at the end of the age of Pisces, on the threshold of the new age of Aquarius. Traditionally, these times of transition between one age and the next have been regarded as ill-omened. That, in a nutshell, is the meaning of precession of the equinoxes, and that is exactly what is involved in the notion of the dawning of the age of Aquarius, quote unquote. The famous line from the musical Hair refers to the fact that every year for the last 2,000 years or so, the sun has risen in Pisces on the vernal equinox. The age of Pisces, however, is now approaching its end, and the vernal sun will soon pass out of the sector of the fish and begin to rise against the new background of Aquarius. The 25,776-year cycle of precession is the engine that drives this majestic celestial juggernaut along its never-ending tour of the heavens. But the details of exactly how precession moves the equinoctial points from Pisces into Aquarius and thence onwards around the zodiac are also worth knowing. Remember that the equinoxes occur on the only two occasions in a year when the Earth's tilted axis lies broadside on to the sun. These are when the sun rises due east all over the world, and a day and a night are of equal length. Because the Earth's axis is slowly but surely precessing in a direction opposite to that of its own orbit, the points at which it lies. Sorry, excuse me. Okay. Lost my place there. Also worth noting, opposite direction. Okay, I'm just going to start from a point. I'm going to start from the beginning of that paragraph. I apologize. Remember that the equinoxes occur on the only two occasions in the year when the Earth's tilted axis lies broadside onto the sun. These are when the sun rises due east all over the world, and day and night are of equal length. Because the Earth's axis is slowly but surely precessing in a direction opposite to that of its own orbit, the points at which it lies broadside onto the sun must occur fractionally earlier in the orbit each year. These annual changes are so small as to be almost imperceptible, a 1 degree shift along the ecliptic, equivalent to the width of your little finger held up to the horizon, requires approximately 72 years to complete. However, as De Santillana points out, such minute changes add up in just under 2,200 years to a 30-degree passage through a complete house of the zodiac, and in just another 26,000 years to a 360-degree passage through a complete cycle of precession. When did the ancients first work out precession? In the answer to this question lies a great secret and mystery of the past. Before we try to penetrate the mystery and to learn the secret, we should acquaint ourselves with the official line. The Encyclopedia Britannica is as good a repository as any of historical The Encyclopedia Britannica is as good a repository as any of conventional historical wisdom, and that is what it tells us about a scholar named Hipparchus, the supposed discoverer of precession. Quote, Hipparchus, also spelled Hipparchus, so it's Hipparchus, also spelled Hipparchos, um, Greek astronomer and mathematician who discovered the precession of the equinoxes. This notable discovery was the result of painstaking observations worked upon by an acute mind. Hipparchus observed the position of the stars and then compared his results with those of Timocharis of Alexandria about 150 years earlier, and with even earlier observations made in Babylonia. He discovered that the celestial longitudes were different and that this difference was of a magnitude exceeding that attributable to errors of observation. He therefore proposed precession to account for the size of the difference, and he gave a value of 45 seconds or 46 seconds of arc for annual changes. This is very close to the figure of 50.274 seconds of arc accepted today. End quote. First, a point of terminology. Seconds of arc are the smallest subdivisions of a degree of arc. There are 60 of these arc seconds in one arc minute, 60 minutes in 1 degree, and 360 degrees in the full circle of Earth's path around the Sun. An annual change of 50.274 seconds of arc represents a distance somewhat under 1/60th of 1 degree, so that it takes roughly 72 years, an entire human lifetime, for the equinoctial sun to migrate just 1 degree along the ecliptic. It is because of the observational difficulties entailed in detecting this snail's pace rate of change that the value worked out by Hipparchus in the 2nd century BC is hailed in the Britannica as a notable discovery. Would this discovery seem so notable if it turned out to be a rediscovery? Would the mathematical and astronomical achievements of the Greeks shine so brightly if we could prove that the difficult challenge of measuring precession had been taken up thousands of years before Hipparchus? What if this heavenly cycle, almost 26,000 years long, had been made the object of precise scientific investigation long epochs before the supposed dawn of scientific thought? In seeking answers to such questions, there is much that may be relevant which would never be accepted by any court of law as concrete proof. Let us not accept it either. We have seen that Hipparchus proposed a value of 45 or 46 seconds of arc for 1 year of precessional motion. Let us therefore not attempt to dislodge the Greek astronomer from his pedestal as the discoverer of precession unless we can find a significantly more accurate value recorded in a significantly more ancient source. Of course, there are many potential sources. At this point, however, in the interests of succinctness, we shall limit our inquiry to universal myths. We have already examined one group of myths in detail, the traditions of flood and cataclysm set out in Part 4, and we have seen that they possess a range of intriguing characteristics. 1. There is no doubt that they are immensely old. Take the Mesopotamian flood story, versions of which have been found inscribed on tablets from the earliest strata of Sumerian history around 3000 BC. These tablets, handed down from the dawn of the recorded past, leave no room for doubt that the tradition of a world-destroying flood was ancient even then, and therefore originated long before the dawn. We cannot say how long. The fact remains that no scholar has ever been able to establish a date for the creation of any myth, let alone for those venerable and widespread traditions. In a very real sense, they seem always to have been around, part of the permanent baggage of human culture. 2. The possibility cannot be ruled out that this aura of vast antiquity is not an illusion. On the contrary, we have seen that many of the great myths of cataclysm seem to contain accurate eyewitness accounts accounts of real conditions experienced by humanity during the last ice age. In theory, therefore, these stories could have been constructed at almost the same time as the emergence of our subspecies, Homo sapiens sapiens, perhaps as long, I think there's a word missing, as long as, or as long ago as 50,000 years ago. The geological evidence, however, suggests a more recent provenance, and we have identified the epoch 15,000 to 8,000 BC as the most likely. Only then, in the whole of human experience, were there rapid climatic changes on the compulsive scale the myths so eloquently describe. 3. The Ice Age and its tumultuous demise were global phenomena. It is therefore perhaps not surprising that the cataclysm traditions of many different cultures widely scattered around the globe should be characterized by a high degree of uniformity and convergence. 4. What is surprising, however, is that the myths not only describe shared experiences, but that they do so in what appears to be a shared symbolic language. The same literary motifs keep cropping up again and again. The same stylistic props, the same recognizable characters, and the same plots. Quote, is a long quote. According to Professor de Santillana, this type of uniformity suggests a guiding hand at work. In Hamlet's Mill, a seminal and original thesis on ancient myths written in collaboration with Hertha von Dechend, professor of the history of science in Frankfurt University, he argues that universality. Well, why does he have that? Okay, so that first paragraph I just read is indented like it's a quote, but apparently it's not. So now we're starting the quote. Universality is in itself a test that, coupled with a firm design, when something found, say, in China, turns up also in Babylonian astrological texts, then it must be assumed to be relevant if it reveals a complex of uncommon images which nobody could claim had risen independently by spontaneous generation. Take the origin of music. Orpheus and his harrowing death may be a poetic creation born in more than one instance in diverse places. But when characters who do not play the lyre but blow pipes get themselves flayed alive for various absurd reasons, and their identical end is rehearsed on several continents, then we feel we have got hold of something. For such stories cannot be linked by internal sequence. And when the Pied Piper turns up both in the German myth of Hamelin and in Mexico long before Columbus, and is linked in both places to certain attributes like the color red, it can hardly be a coincidence. Likewise, when one finds numbers like 108 or 9 times 13 reappearing under several multiples in the Vedas, in the temples of Angkor in Babylon, in Heraclitus's dark utterances, and also in the Norse Valhalla, it is not accident. End quote. Connecting the great universal myths of cataclysm, is it possible that such coincidences that cannot be coincidences and accidents that cannot be accidents could denote the global influence of an ancient, though as yet unidentified, guiding hand? If so, could it be that same hand during and after the last ice age which drew the series of highly accurate and technically advanced world maps reviewed in Part 1? And might not the same hand have left its ghostly fingerprints in another body of universal myths, those concerning the death and resurrection of gods, and great trees around which the earth and heavens turn, and whirlpools and churns and drills, and other similar revolving, grinding contrivances? According to Santillana and von Dechend, all such images refer to celestial events and do so furthermore in the refined technical language of an archaic but, quote, immensely sophisticated, end quote, astronomical and mathematical science. Quote, this language ignores local beliefs and cults. It concentrates on numbers, motions, measures, overall frames, schemas, on the structure of numbers, on geometry, end quote. Where could such a language have come from? Hamlet's mill, in a labyrinth of brilliant but deliberately evasive scholarship, uh, Hamlet's Mill is a labyrinth of brilliantly but deliberately evasive scholarship and offers us no straightforward answer to this question. Here and there, however, almost with embarrassment, conclusive hints are dropped. For example, at one point, the authors say that the scientific language or code they believe they have identified is of quote unquote awe inspiring antiquity. On another occasion, they pin down the length of this antiquity more precisely to a period of at least quote, 6,000 years before Virgil, end quote. In other words, 8,000 years ago or more. What civilization known to history could have developed and made use of a sophisticated technical language more than 8,000 years ago? The honest answer to this question is none, followed by a frank admission that what is being conjectured is nothing less than a forgotten episode of high technological culture in prehistoric times. Once again, Santayana and Van Deschend are elusive when it comes to the crunch, speaking only of the legacy we all owe to, quote, some almost unbelievable ancestor civilization, end quote. That that, quote, first dared to understand the world as created according to number, measure, and weight, end quote. The legacy, it is clear, has to do with scientific thinking and complex information of a mathematical nature. Because it is so extremely old, however, the passage of time has dissipated it. Quote, when the Greeks came upon the scene, the dust of centuries had already settled upon the remains of this great worldwide archaic construction, yet something of it survived in traditional rites, in myths and fairy tales no longer understood. These are tantalizing fragments of a lost whole. They make one think of those quote unquote mist landscapes of which the Chinese painters are masters, which show here a rock, here a gable, there the tip of a tree, and leave the rest to imagination. Even when the code shall have yielded, when the techniques shall be known, we cannot expect to gauge the thought of these remote ancestors of ours, wrapped as it is in its symbols since the creation, ordering minds that devise the symbols have vanished forever. End quote. Sorry, some of that was a little rough. What we have here, therefore, are two distinguished professors of the history of science from esteemed universities on both sides of the Atlantic, claiming to have discovered the remnants of a coded scientific language many thousands of years older than the oldest human civilizations identified by scholarship. Moreover, though generally cautious, Santayana and Van Deschend also claim to have, quote, broken part of that code, end quote. And then this is an extraordinary statement for two serious academics to have made. And that is the end of that chapter. That one was not as easy a read as the others have been, but that's okay. A little more technical stuff. All right. Excuse me. That will put us at chapter 30 for next time. I'll read 30, 31, and 32. We'll finish out this section of the book, um, even if I have to take a break halfway through. So, all righty. I'm going to call it there, and I will see you all tomorrow night for Star Wars, barring catastrophe again. I know I missed last week. So, see you then.
Feeling shattered skies, watching teary blue eyes, wonder where I might find some peace of mind. Not lights like I've had, but more sophisticated into love relations. Now disassembling my own heart, 'cause my mind's a million places and giving up. So it's in my head. Just tell me it's not happening. Tell me it's not happening. Surrender myself. I feel the world collapsing in my ears. Not lights like I've had, but more sophisticated into love relations. Now disassembling my own heart, 'cause my mind's a million places and giving up. So it's in my head. Just tell me it's not happening. Tell me it's not happening. Surrender myself. I feel the world collapsing in my ears.